So, have you ever been curious about astral projection? You know, that idea of experiencing the world beyond your physical body. It's a concept that's captivated people for centuries, and for good reason. But let me tell you, the moment you start looking into techniques for actually doing it, it can get pretty overwhelming. There are just so many methods and approaches out there.
It's true. The sheer number of techniques can be a bit much. But what I find so fascinating is that this core idea, this potential to experience consciousness in a completely new way, it keeps popping up across such a diverse range of cultures and philosophies and spiritual traditions.
And that's what makes this deep dive so interesting. Instead of getting lost in that massive sea of how-tos from our main source, 66 astral projection techniques, we're going to pull out a few, really intriguing methods. Think of it like a curated tasting platter, just to kind of spark your imagination.
Exactly. It's kind of like finding your own meditation style, right? It's
Yeah.
about discovering what clicks with you. Some techniques are really rooted in specific traditions, while others are more about working with energy or exploring altered states of consciousness. It's a very personal journey.
And speaking of those unique techniques, are you ready to dive into some of the more out there methods from that Revenant compilation?
Absolutely. Let's do it. I'm curious to see what jumps out.
Okay, so the first one, technique, #1, is the Gurtatak mantra.
Hmm?
Now, I don't know about you, but when I hear astral projection, chanting unusual sounds isn't exactly the first thing that springs to mind.
Yeah.
This technique involves specific pronunciations and breath work, and it focuses on these sounds, G, T, and tak.
Interesting. What I find really interesting about that one is how it goes beyond just that typical visual of, floating above your body. People who practice this technique, they describe experiencing all sorts of energetic sensations, vibrations, rushes of energy, even like heightened dream activity.
Wow.
It suggests there's a lot more to understand about subtle energies and maybe how we can learn to work with them.
Definitely challenges the typical image of astral projection.
Right.
So, moving on. Next up, we have technique, #2, the third eye escape.
Okay.
Now, this one, I have to say, immediately brings to mind that whole psychic abilities aspect that often gets linked to astral projection.
It's funny how this technique connects to the pineal gland, that tiny part of the brain located right between your eyebrows.
So interesting.
Historically, it's been connected to everything from spiritual insight to extrasensory perception. And even though modern science is mostly focused on its role in hormone production, there are still people who believe it has all this untapped potential.
It makes you wonder, could the pineal gland actually act as some kind of receiver for subtle energies? Or maybe even a bridge connecting us to other dimensions?
Who knows?
Ready for an even more physical approach?
Yeah, hit me with it.
All right, technique, #37. This one is called the rope technique. It's all about visualization. So you imagine there's a rope dangling from the ceiling and you use it to physically pull yourself up and out of your body. The technique even emphasizes the feeling of vertigo you might experience during this process.
I love that one. It's such a clever example of how you can use a very specific physical action, but just imagining it, of course, to trigger a shift in consciousness.
Yeah.
By simulating the sensation of movement, of going upward, it's almost like you're tricking the mind into separating from the physical body.
It's amazing how powerful focusing on those physical sensations, even if they're just imagined, can be.
Mm,
Reading the description of that technique,
Mhm.
I almost felt a phantom tug myself.
right. The power of suggestion is real.
No kidding. All right, let's switch gears completely with one more technique for now. Technique, #46, the rebirthing method. This one moves away from visualization entirely and instead focuses on the power of breath.
This one reminds me of yogic breathing practices, pranayama. They've been used for centuries to manipulate energy and reach those altered states. The rebirthing method, it uses rapid, deep breathing, and the aim is to induce a state where astral projection might become possible. It shows how, for a lot of people, astral projection isn't just about seeing some other realm, it's about reaching a heightened state of consciousness through, real energy work.
It's fascinating how we've looked at 4 vastly different techniques, each with its own unique approach. And we've barely scratched the surface. It really gives you a sense of just how incredibly diverse this whole world of astral projection techniques really is.
Absolutely. And it's so important to remember these are just starting points. The real journey starts when you begin experimenting yourself, adapting these techniques to fit your own beliefs and experiences, and yeah, your own personal energy.
It's really interesting, actually, looking back at these techniques, even though they're so different, there do seem to be some common threads between them. What kind of similarities have you picked up on?
Well, one of the big ones that jumps out at me is the focus on relaxation. That, practically every single technique, whether it's like physically relaxing the body or using breathing exercises or meditation, they all stress how important it is to reach this state of deep relaxation.
Right.
It's almost as if, when you can quiet down all the noise of the physical body, that's when those more subtle experiences can start to come through.
Yeah, that makes sense. It would be pretty hard to imagine your mind like taking a trip to another realm if it's still busy replaying that awkward conversation you had at the grocery store earlier or something.
Exactly. And kind of going hand in hand with relaxation, you've got visualization. So creating those really vivid mental images,
Right.
whether it's the rope that you're using to pull yourself out or picturing a very specific location that you want to try to visit, the mind definitely plays a huge role in astral projection.
It's like visualization almost acts as a sort of bridge,
Uh-huh.
between our everyday physical reality and that non-physical realm that people are trying to connect with.
Exactly. And then, of course, there's the whole element of energy, manipulating it, intensifying it, using it to, like, separate from the physical body.
Yeah.
You think back to the Girdatak mantra, they talk about it working with subtle energies, or even the rope technique with that emphasis on building vibrations. It seems like being able to access and control energy is a common goal for a lot of these techniques.
So relaxation, visualization, and energy. Would you say those are the core pillars of astral projection techniques then?
I think those are a really good place to start, for sure. And what I think is so interesting is that those elements aren't limited to just astral projection.
No, that's true.
We see them in things like meditation, lucid dreaming, even certain energy healing practices.
That's a great point. So for our listeners who are feeling inspired by this and maybe want to give some of these techniques a try, what advice would you give them? Where should they start?
I'd say, first and foremost, don't get overwhelmed. There's really no right or wrong way to do this.
Yeah.
These techniques are really just invitations, to explore, to play around and find what really clicks for you personally.
It's about like finding your own path, your own approach.
Exactly. Pay attention to what sparks your curiosity, what just feels right when you try it. Approach it like an experiment.
Yeah.
Be willing to adapt the techniques as you go and, see how your own energy and your own personal beliefs kind of shape your experience.
So if you're listening to this, ask yourself, what techniques have really resonated with you?
Yeah.
What's kind of sparked your imagination? What feels most intriguing to try out? That's your starting point.
And to build on that, maybe think about how you can personalize those techniques.
Right.
Do you, naturally connect more with visualization, or is it more about breath work for you? Do you have any existing spiritual or energetic practices that you could maybe try to incorporate into this?
Make it your own, It's all about that journey of exploration. But before you grab your metaphorical rope and try this out in the middle of a crowded elevator or something, there is one more thing that we should probably address.
Ah, yes. We should probably talk about the elephant in the room.
Right.
A little bit of skepticism.
Exactly. Let's be real here. Some of you listening are probably thinking, hold on a minute, is any of this actually real? And that's totally fair. It's a healthy question to ask. It's totally understandable to be a little skeptical when you're talking about, experiences that are outside the realm of what we normally consider normal.
Yeah, for sure. And I think it's important to acknowledge that a lot of the evidence we have for astral projection is anecdotal. It's based on people's personal experiences and stories, which can be really hard to, measure scientifically.
So I guess we shouldn't expect to see, double-blind studies on the rope technique being published anytime soon, huh?
Probably not. But, that doesn't mean that we can't learn anything from scientific research in other areas. There are definitely some interesting overlaps with things like, lucid dreaming, for instance.
Oh, yeah. That's a good one.
Lucid dreaming is where you basically become aware that you're dreaming while you're still in the dream. And that's something that's actually been getting a lot more attention from researchers lately.
Interesting.
They're looking at things like brainwave activity, physiological changes, and even potential therapeutic applications for it.
And some of the techniques that people use to try to induce lucid dreams, things like reality checks or visualization, they're pretty similar to some of the things that come up with astral projection too, aren't they? So could there be a deeper connection there?
It's definitely possible. And then you've got this whole broader field of altered states of consciousness, which is all about how our minds can experience reality in all these wildly different ways, whether it's through meditation or hypnosis, even certain psychoactive substances.
So even though we might not have concrete proof of astral projection, research into other areas is showing us that the human mind is capable of way more than we often give it credit for.
Exactly. It's not about blindly believing everything, right? It's about being open-minded and willing to explore these ideas. And that's really what we're trying to encourage here. Explore these techniques, experiment with them and see what happens, and just expand our understanding of what might be possible.
Maybe the real value is in the journey itself, like exploring the nature of consciousness and sort of pushing the boundaries of what we believe is possible.
I love that. That's a great way to put it. And it kind of leads us to a final question for, well, anyone listening out there.
Right? Because even if we put aside that whole debate about whether or not astral projection is objectively real, there's still a really powerful question that we can all ask ourselves.
Yeah, absolutely. Like if you could explore the world beyond your physical body, what would you be most curious about? What would you want to go see? What mysteries would you want to try to understand?
What hidden corners of reality would you be most drawn to?
Because, maybe, just maybe, when we engage with these possibilities, even just by asking those questions, it opens us up to a wider, more expansive experience of the world, even if our feet never actually leave the ground.
Such a great point to end on. It's definitely given us all a lot to think about. Thanks so much for joining us on this deep dive into astral projection techniques. Until next time.
Keep exploring, everyone.